Arts Commission, we have Ms. Jennifer Cole, the Executive Director. We have Ms. Paula Roberts, the Commission Chair, and Mr. Ian Myers, the Finance Analysis. Before we begin with your presentation, Ms. Cole, are you satisfied with the Mayor's budget proposal for your department?
We are certainly thankful for all that the Mayor has considered and given us in our budget, but we would certainly love to talk about more enhancements.
All right. Go ahead.
Okay. Before I start, I want to give a big thank you to Paula, the chair of our commission, and to most of my commission, which I think is sitting out in the gallery. About 8 members of our 15-member commission are in the gallery, and I'd like to thank them. I'd also like to thank all the members of the Nashville Arts Coalition, which I believe represent just about every council district in the county. If you're here representing the Nashville Arts Coalition in the gallery, would you mind raising your hand? Thank you very much. That gallery represents arts organizations, individual artists, gallery owners, and simply citizens and students. I think I have a handful of students back there who love and participate in the arts. And it feels really good to come before this body in a year when we have more general optimism about the city and our financial outlook. We continue to recover economically, and the region is strong and getting stronger, fueled in part by a growth in creative jobs and the livability of our community. I understand how many priorities you have to balance, and we are so thankful for Metro Arts and giving us the opportunity to answer your questions and to make a case for deeper arts investment. I'm proud to let you know that your support of our budget over the last few years has had really demonstrable impact. Just in the last 2 quarters of this fiscal year, Metro Arts grant funding leveraged over 1,090 jobs, full-time jobs, in the arts sector, and 1,400 contract and part-time employee jobs just in the 56 art organizations that we grant money to. Through our funding, there were 8,700 free public cultural activities and more than 57,000 Metro school children. In fact, every single Metro public school had access to art through field trips and public performances. Every single Metro school. This year, the Mayor and Mr. Riebling have seen fit to add in additional monies in our budget to support the Americans for the Arts Convention. We were lucky as a city to compete nationally to host this premier event, which is sort of the national convening of arts leaders, policymakers, and arts educators. Working with the CVB, we realized that this will have about a $1.8 million impact on our on the economic condition of Nashville next year, which is roughly equivalent to the amount of money we give out in grants every year, strangely enough. We hope that you'll give us the opportunity today to talk a little bit more about making the case for increased investment in arts and in creative economy. Currently, as proposed in budget, even with the enhancements for Americans for the Arts, our budget is effectively the same as it was in the year 2000, 13 years ago. Since that time, our population as a county has grown by 64,120 people, most of that growth in young people and 6% in our Hispanic population. Funding at that same time period for visual arts and performing arts in Metro Public Schools has been flat or declined. And individual, corporate, and foundation donations for the arts have declined nationally at 10%. More so, our population has shifted away from the urban core, where many of our cultural institutions are based, to the ring areas of the county where we have fewer cultural resources and need infrastructure desperately. At the same time, our city has emerged as a mecca for creative talent and jobs like music, fashion, film, and design. To use a springtime metaphor, we've planted an amazing garden full of new and exciting plants, and many things are beginning to bloom, to put us on the cover of national magazines and national lists. However, we've not fertilized or watered the garden very well. Without adding more resources, we all know what will happen over time. In order to continue to drive innovation and to serve our shifting population and our arts audience in our county, we need to truly consider deeper and more substantive investments in arts and culture. Consider this: our competitor cities like Austin, Portland, Raleigh, and Charlotte, and even Philadelphia and San Antonio have created multiple ways to support their creative economy through multiple funding streams, from traditional arts grants like we administer to ECD incentives. We must begin this path now or lose traction and most likely jobs. Music City was built by creatives. Somewhere, maybe at IT Cresswell Middle or Churchwell, Museum Magnet or Park Avenue, there might just be the next Nikki Giovanni or Steve Jobs or Red Grooms. And we as a city have to do 2 things to keep our community powered by this innovation. 1, put more resources in community arts funding for arts education, and 2, provide more direct funding to professional artists for community arts activities in neighborhoods that each of you represent. If your priorities would allow it, we would deeply consider additional dollars so that Metro Arts can focus on those 2 priorities to make our community the best it can possibly be. Thank you, and I would love to answer questions.
All right, Councilmember Starr.
Thank you, and thank everyone for being here. Clearly, it's unusual to see this much support in general for one of our budget hearings, and it does not go unnoticed. Jen, I believe in your presentation to the mayor, you talked about the commission's relationship to after school and to that programming, and I thought that I had remembered some kind of request from you all with regard to further support for for NASA and after school education in general.
Yes, so we have a funding category called After School Arts that specifically supports after school arts programming, linking professional artists in the after school space. There's a strong alignment with the Mayor's After School Zone Alliance and the lowest performing middle schools and the highest risk students. We certainly, if there were additional dollars, that would be a major priority area for us, both after school arts and then community-based arts. Based on what I talked about earlier about the population shifting and some neighborhoods simply not having places to experience and participate in arts, we really want to put as much of that infrastructure as we can to the people that have the least access to them.
Well, it's no surprise to any of my colleagues or anybody else that one of my great disappointments is the fact that overall grants funding has really moved back. Unfortunately, I don't think it's any greater than everything else has been cut, and that in and of itself has been a blessing. But I would say that the funding for your work with After School, which is an initiative that is reaching kids and reaching a bunch of council districts in parts of town and expanding to a new area, is one of those areas that this council, in our frustration sometimes about the public school system, can actually be providing some meaningful education that helps our young people in the classroom, because the numbers in NAS are very good for those performing. So I would say that I don't know what the right amount is, so I'll say 100, but more likely 50 may be the ultimate number for our wish list for you all to be applied to, I would hope, to the after-school initiatives. Again, I say that because we know without the nonprofit community in Nashville that even though we're trying with arts education and we're now trying with music and doing all those things, without this money and without those folks providing arts education in our schools, it would be minuscule. And so I think that this is a bang for our buck that gets directly to kids, and they've got great numbers that we can get from NASA about the effect it's having. So I would encourage us to at least think about that as a wish list item. And obviously it's going to be tight, and there are no guarantees in any of this, but it ought to be on the table, particularly since it applies to so many specific geographic areas throughout the city of Nashville.
Thank you. And I would say that like I always say to this body, that the amount of money that we're talking about to make huge impact is quite low, and so a $50,000 to $100,000 additional for our arts, after-school arts, and our arts access programs, which also provide art for seniors, for veterans, for people with disabilities, make a huge impact. The average grant size in arts education grants is $4,500. So we're talking small amounts of money that make an incredible impact with young people and with other members of the community. So thank you, Councilman.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Stein. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Matthews. Thank you, Chair Cole, and Board Chair Roberts, and staff members here, and all of the arts supporters in the Nashville community. This is a large turnout, and obviously a reflection of the excitement in our city around this very issue with arts. One thing I want to say is in Southeast Davidson County, we are very, very excited about the visibility of the art pieces that are getting ready to take shape on the west side of Murfreesboro Road near the Antioch Community Center and the mall location and the crossings area. We look forward to some of that art trickling over on the east side of Murfreesboro Road. And I also want to commend you all on the moving forward with the Civil Rights Art Project downtown. That is a much anticipated art project reflecting the sit-ins and our freedom riders. And we're looking forward to the African American Museum complementing our new Music City Center and having the artwork that is being reflected in the downtown quarter at the new African American Museum as well. What I want to ask is, if there is an increase in your budget, what would be the priorities of the Arts Commission, and how would this affect neighborhoods?
Thank you for that. Well, thank you for the compliments, first of all, Council Lady. And then we're also excited about all of our public art projects. The question about if there was an increase, the priorities would be very clear. One is arts education, and that takes the form in both what Councilman Stein referenced in terms of after-school arts. It also takes the form of many of our grantees and organizations represented in the gallery do direct work during the school day with students, as well as providing opportunities for arts education for other special populations, like our ELL population, people with disabilities, and seniors in particular. So having access and through grant programs and direct funding, more opportunities to get more of those folks educated around art and working directly in the arts would be one. The second is that we have approximately in this county 36,000 people who make their living as artists or creatives. And I think the single best way to energize neighborhoods is to give resources to artists so that they can help transform the economy of a neighborhood. I can't think of a better example than the example that is happening in Donaldson and Hermitage right now, where the citizens, artists, gallery owners, this Chamber of Commerce have gathered together and are really using art as an organizing framework to transform that community. I think HIP Donaldson has upwards of 4,000 people on its Facebook page, and art, 5,000, Phil's telling me 5. Councilman Claiborne's telling me 5,000, that are really using art and art as a community building tool, and with very small amounts of money to sort of fund artist-driven initiatives at the neighborhood level, we can make those types of transformations happen all over the city. So those would be our two priorities, is directly funding artist-initiated projects and funding arts education. It's a great, and we would love to do that.
One more question. Has there been any effort around doing joint grant-seeking opportunities with Metro schools? You know, because they have a grants division where people work specifically on grants and grant funding. To have artwork, for example, like the artwork that's been recently unveiled over by Shelby and I'm trying to think of Peter Westerholm's area, and downtown on the riverfront in front of the elementary schools in each quadrant of the city. I've had a lot of constituents ask me if we really truly want our students to be excited about art and the beauty of these art projects, them having to come downtown and go to many different areas of the city is good. But have you all considered looking at putting artwork like that in front of some of the strategic elementary schools to just kind of get that going?
Well, I'll answer that in two questions. So the first part of the question was about joint grant seeking with Metro schools, and we are not currently doing joint grant seeking around that at the moment. We do many things with Metro schools, but sort of joint funding hasn't been necessarily one of them. In terms of making the public art collection more accessible to teachers and kids, we haven't necessarily identified schools as a target location for installing art. One issue is maintenance, which art tends to be worn more, has heavy wear and tear, which costs us money at the elementary school level. That's one reason. The second is that schools are often only occupied for 9 months out of the year. And so we want to make sure that we're putting public art in places that can be seen 12 months out of the year. That's one issue. The second is, but what we have done to make the public collection more accessible is every single public art project that we've brought online in the last 18 months has a classroom guide that's written to Common Core standards, that's completely downloadable, that teacher can use photographs, interviews with the artists that are on YouTube, and can use it in their class. They don't ever even have to leave the class to use that artwork in their class as a teaching tool. And we've actually just initiated a partnership with Lipscomb University and the Ayers Institute for Teaching, where their pre-service teachers are going to be developing unit lesson plans in science, math, history, and English around every new piece of public art that we install. So our hope is that, yes, I would love for every public place in this county to have public art. I would love to be there. Until we can get there, until we have enough staff, enough time, enough money, and enough hours in the day, the sort of single best opportunity that we have is to do classroom guides so that teachers, if they don't have field trip money and can't leave the classroom, really can bring that art right into the class, and they can teach it in history, in science, in math, or in fine art. So I know it's not 100% the answer that you want, but it is something that we are doing and that we are very committed to in terms of education.
Well, thank you, but just long-range planning, look at possibly having some of that same type of artwork on the front of the property of the schools, not where the children are at the playgrounds or any of those areas on the school properties, but working with Metro Schools because they have grant professionals that can also assist in the effort of bringing some of those art projects to schools that are centralized within a community, because schools are somewhat centralized locations within many of our communities, and strategically looking at where those are and possibly looking at putting art out in the front of those schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady.
Thank you, Council Lady Johnson. Councilman Bedney.
Thank you. I always get the last question because I'm at the bottom of the list, I guess. Thank you for all the work you do, Ms. Cole and your staff. My question is, I wonder how much we can push the envelope. My degree is in architecture. I'm interested in urban installation, guerrilla urbanism, the makers movement, trying to find the intersection between art, technology, urbanism, architecture. Is that something that falls within your area? I mean, is that something I could challenge you with?
I always love a challenge, so yes, feel free to challenge us. One of the things we do often, particularly in public art, is look at the intersection between urban design and art, and what we call in our wonky language, placemaking, which is how does art and sort of particularly public art sort of transform community. So yes, we would love to talk about that. And there is quite a lot of urban guerrilla art happening in Nashville right now. So sometimes it's better if government agencies don't facilitate that and we just let it happen. But yes.
Well, I guess the question is your budget enough is up to that challenge? I mean,
that's a great question. I would say the single, in terms of new art projects and art making projects, we do not have a revenue stream for temporary art. So the Percent for Art program is not geared towards temporary art and installations, so those things that might go up over a weekend and then go away. It really is geared towards long-term and permanent art. So I would say a gap in our funding mechanism is temporary art, and it is certainly an area. When I talked earlier about wanting to fund artist-driven projects, one of the key things we would love to have is a source of funds, and they wouldn't have to be big, to really, if artists came to us with programs like that were temporary in nature and had a community engagement component, the ability to fund those in a different way. So I would say no, we don't really have the funding mechanism, but yes, we would love to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Bedney. Councilor Allen.
Thank you all for being here. I'd just like to follow up on the community art and the placing art where people can be this. Jen, you may know where I'm headed with this one. And I know, and artist-driven projects as well. I know that sometimes there's a challenge with community art, locating it in a park or a public right-of-way,
yes,
just with the insurance issue. Would it be possible to get some financial information on what it would cost for Metro to take the insurance piece of that while letting the community deal with the maintenance piece of that?
Yes, and actually there are other cities that have model programs where the city works to kind of work with the artists, make sure that they have what they need, and kind of carry some of that burden, and then is able to provide either through competitive grants or direct funding for the artists. So yes, there are models to that, and I can put some materials together and get them to.
That would be
Mr.
helpful.
Cooper.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Allen. Councilman Banks.
Jen, I want to thank you all for the work you do at the Arts Commission, and the commissioners too. Y'all are doing some good stuff for Nashville. I do have a quick question. I know that y'all talk about strategically wanting to get into creative jobs, incubation, and projects along those lines. Are there currently funds in the operating budget for you all to do that kind of work? And what kind of partnerships do you see developing over the next year, 2 years, that might be something that could drive that kind of work?
Thank you, Councilman Banks. It's a fantastic question. We're working a lot right now at the Mayor's Office of Economic Development in this space. Particularly, ECD works with major job recruitment. A lot of what we've been talking about is makers, freelancers, small batch folks who kind of don't have a place to land. And so I would tell you right now there's some active conversations with the Chamber, with Economic Development, and with some other folks in town about how do we kind of create some turnkey programs to bring these people together around professional development services, training programs, boot camps, things like that, access to capital in terms of investment capital, and then also sort of marketing. So something Austin has done that I think is incredibly successful that we could easily copy is they've created a designation called iBiz districts, where there's some geographic-based incentives and training programs to really help small proprietors, distilleries, breweries, little maker shops, kind of congregate together, and then they sort of market them kind of as iBiz districts. So it really becomes part of the neighborhood identity that you've got your iBiz district and you're able to market and bring foot traffic there from a retail component. I think this organically happens all over the city, but I think that there are certainly, I think the mayor's office is really well aware of this, but I do think it's a growth opportunity for the council, not just to look at our budget, but to look at other departmental budgets that can really kind of get to that piece. So I do think looking at an incentive program for individuals and small businesses, micro businesses, is a good thing for the council as a whole. Whether it would live here or live somewhere else where it's more appropriate is I think a question. But I think that many of the cities I referenced, Austin, Charlotte, Raleigh, are doing a really great job of this, and they're creating infrastructure that is keeping those 1 or 2 off jobs or the freelance jobs. The people who are working at coffee shops that you go into and say, who are those people? What are they doing? Well, they're working, and they're working for themselves, or they're working for some of those people out in the gallery. The reality is once we aggregate those jobs, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of them, and that infrastructure is just a little harder to slice and dice than maybe a relocation. But I think it begs some attention in terms of how we think about that, because that's honestly where the growth rate is in terms of many jobs for people under the age of 30. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Banks. Councilor Lancaster.
Yes, Ms. Cole, thank you and Ms. Roberts and the entire gallery for being here tonight on this important issue. What about the African American Museum? Do you had any contact about the arts that might possibly be in place for that?
I'm going to defer that one to Ms. Roberts.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask Chairman if it's a budget issue. I don't know.
Are you asking about Metro's allocation towards that, Councilor Lancaster, or?
The art end of it, has there been any conversation about what might possibly be in place for the arts inside of this museum?
We have given thought to it, but we haven't come up with a formalized answer at this time, but it is something that we are thinking about. I know that we have looked at possibilities of long-term planning with obviously the commission and then obviously with the city.
Right. There's currently nothing in this current budget that's allocated to the National Museum for African American Music. Did that answer your question, ma'am?
Partially, but
okay.
I'll get with you on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lancaster. And seeing no other council members in queue, I'd like to thank Ms. Cole and her guests for coming before us. Your department hearing is closed.
Thank you.
Thank you.